I want to speak about a movie review. I want to do a video movie review. It's Moshiach's Tehiyas Hamasim weekend, and people are looking for movies that have a resurrection theme. And this is one I highly recommend. It's called The Case for Christ. And some of you may be familiar with a movie that came out several years ago. It doesn't seem that long, but it has been that long. The Da Vinci Code. And in that movie, there's a sort of a detective story where the faith is being debunked by this team of detectives. Tom Hanks and his sidekick. And in this movie, the plot is a little bit similar in the fact that it's sort of a investigative reporter detective story. But just as Tom Hanks' Da Vinci Code detective supposedly uncovers evidence that attacks our faith, this Mike Vogel actor, he's supposed to be Chicago Tribune reporter Lee Strobel. He does investigative reporter detective work that actually supports our faith. And, basically, here's how the story begins. He's an atheist. He and his wife have their little girl, and they're in this restaurant, and she goes over to the bubblegum machine, and she gets this great big round bubblegum thing dislodged in her throat, and she's going to die. And in the table next to them, there's this nurse who saves her. And the nurse tells them later, look, I was going to go to another restaurant, but the Lord sent me here. And then the atheist, of course, the Lee Strobel character, he shrugs that off. But his wife sees maybe there is some evidence that there is a God, that this is a providential thing that happened. And so what begins now is a marital fight between the atheist and the lady becoming a believer. And then he, because he's on the Chicago Tribune staff, he's an investigative reporter, he begins to see the only way he can win his wife back is to disprove the whole thing. We're talking about going to experts, finding the provenance of the manuscripts of the New Testament to be spurious. So we have to go and deal with somebody who's going to show him that when you look at Homer's Iliad and other ancient books, the earliest copy we have is very recent, but there's nothing like that with the New Testament. In fact, you can go back to just a few years from the event with a little fragment of part of the Bible. And so he doesn't get any help there. Then he goes to other experts. He goes to medical colleges and seminaries, and he keeps getting on planes. For instance, the medical investigation. He finds out that when Yeshua died, he really did die, and the strain on the body that's involved in hanging on a tree and being pierced is explained. The myocardial infarction, all the medical stuff. So the swoon theory is completely debunked. And then when it comes to Faye Dunaway, now she's in this movie. She plays a psychologist in a university. When he gets on a plane and flies to where she is, she really knocks the ball out of the park. Because let me explain something. My father, and I want to give a little side note here. My father had paranoia schizophrenia. And when the postman would come up on our porch, my father thought that he was a spy. Now, if you are hallucinating, and let's say you see a postman coming up on your porch, and his postal uniform in your mind becomes like a military uniform, and his face becomes your father's face, and you're having a hallucination because your dad was a general in the army or whatever, and you're seeing him, but it's not really him. It's just the postman. Now that's crazy. But if 500 people at one time had the same thing, the same kind of hallucination or delusion, mirage, whatever you want to call it, that would be even a greater miracle than the resurrection, according to the Faye Dunaway character. And so we're talking about a mass delusion where 500 eyewitnesses see the same mirage or share the same hallucination, which is impossible. And when you get to 1 Corinthians 15, he gives you this record of all the eyewitnesses, including himself. And most of these people are martyred, or at least the key one, the main ones are martyred. So an apparent perception of something that's really not there is not something that can happen with 500 people at one time. And so I'm not going to spoil it by telling you how the movie ends, but I'm going to tell you that it's a very well-made movie, and it takes you on a journey much more interesting than the journey that Tom Hanks took you on in the Da Vinci Code movie. And this is the season when people want to see this type of a movie. This is Moshiach's Tehiyas HaMasim celebration weekend. And so I want to highly recommend it, that you go and see it. At the very end of the movie, you find out who Lee Strobel is, who authored a book. There's over 14 million copies have been sold, and he's now a pastor. So you can see he's come a long way from an atheistic Chicago Tribune reporter to where he is today. And I think this is a fantastic movie. I'd like to get a DVD of it later when it's available, and I'd like to use it to give people some real evidence that our faith is not just a blind leap based on nothing more than hopeful thinking, wishful thinking, but there is that the same God who took the time to put all these messianic prophecies together in the Tanakh did a great deal of the same. And there's one other thing I want, and that's the Brit Hadashah, I should say. But there's one other thing I want to say, and that has to do with the fact that the women who are the key eyewitnesses, since their testimony would not be accepted in court, the very fact that this is how the writers depict the whole thing shows that they're telling the truth, because if they were making it up, they certainly wouldn't go that direction. So that's also brought out as the detective, the investigative reporter of the Chicago Tribune, as he deals with these various experts, they point out things like that to him. And so I pray right now that America will take the time to see this movie this weekend. The Case for Christ is the name of it. And it's now playing, it's now showing in theaters all over the United States. God bless you.